The faded paint of the roadside motel, only guest, owner acting strange sign peeled like sunburnt skin. I'd driven for 10 hours, the landscape blurring into an indistinguishable smear of pine and asphalt. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, a testament to the tension coiled in my gut. This was it. The end of the road, at least for tonight. The motel was a lone, skeletal finger pointing at the bruised twilight sky, miles from anywhere that might offer a decent cup of coffee or a less peculiar atmosphere. I killed the engine and the sudden silence was thick, broken only by the frantic thrumming in my ears. It wasn't the quiet of peace. It was the quiet of anticipation. The kind that settles before a storm or before something truly awful happens. My historian's brain, usually buzzing with forgotten dates and obscure rituals, felt sluggish, dulled by fatigue and the unsettling stillness of this place. The air, when I opened the car door, was heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else, something faintly metallic, like old pennies or dried blood. I shivered, pulling my worn tweed jacket tighter. The proprietor, a man whose face seemed perpetually etched with a kind of weary resignation, had greeted me with a nod that barely disturbed the dust motes dancing in the dim light of the office. He'd handed me a single, heavy key, his eyes a pale, unsettling blue not quite meeting mine. He was the only guest, he'd said, his voice a low rasp, and he was the owner. The words hung in the air, a strange, redundant pronouncement that pricked at my already frayed nerves. My assigned room was at the far end of the single-story building. The door creaked open with a groan that sounded like a wounded animal. Inside, the air was stale, carrying the faint, cloying sweetness of decay. The wallpaper, a pattern of faded roses, seemed to weep damp streaks down the walls. A single bare bulb cast a sickly yellow light, revealing a sparse, utilitarian space. A lumpy bed, a scarred wooden dresser, a chair with one leg shorter than the others. It was the kind of room that whispered of forgotten lives and lingering regrets. I tossed my duffel bag onto the bed, the springs groaning in protest. My academic career felt as dilapidated as this room, as this motel. Years spent poring over crumbling manuscripts, chasing whispers of forgotten lore, and for what? A meager salary, dismissive colleagues, and a growing pile of unpublished research. My dissertation, a deep dive into pre-Christian agrarian cults, had been met with polite indifference. The academic world, it seemed, preferred its history neatly catalogued and devoid of anything that smacked of the uncanny. They wanted facts, not feelings. But I knew there was more. There were stories that refused to be buried, truths that clawed their way to the surface, demanding to be heard. And my current obsession, a fragmented collection of local legends surrounding a remote corner of the country, had recently yielded a tantalizing lead. A forgotten manor, its history shrouded in rumor and superstition. A place said to be built on something ancient, something hungry. Then the letter had arrived. A thick, cream-colored envelope bearing an unfamiliar crest. My great-aunt Alara, a name I barely recognized, had passed away. And I, her last living relative, had inherited her estate, a place I'd only encountered in the periphery of my research, a name whispered in hushed tones by those who still remembered the old ways. A sudden gust of wind rattled the window pane, making me jump. My heart, which I'd sworn wasn't pounding, did a frantic little jig against my ribs. I tried to dismiss it. Fatigue, the unnerving proprietor, the sheer isolation. The parking lot was empty save for my own car. No other vehicles, no other guests, just me, the lonely building, and the vast, indifferent night. The proprietor had been adamant, only guest, he'd repeated, his pale eyes unnervingly fixed. Was he the owner or just here? A faint, rhythmic scraping sound drifted from somewhere outside. It was too regular to be the wind, too deliberate. My breath hitched. What was that sound, and why did it feel like it was meant for me? The roadside motel, only guest, owner acting strange sign rattled on its hinges, a skeletal finger pointing toward the sagging structure. 10 hours. 10 hours of my life bled into the monotonous hum of the engine, the endless gray ribbon of highway unspooling before me. My hands, I noticed, were clammy. I wiped them on my jeans, the rough denim a fleeting comfort against my skin. The air inside the car felt thick, stale, as if the miles had compressed it. The motel itself was a monument to neglect. Paint, the color of bruised plums, flaked from its clapboard sides. A single flickering neon tube above the office door cast a sickly green pallor on the cracked asphalt. No other vehicles were present. The silence here was a heavy blanket, muffling the distant drone of insects pressing in on my ears. I killed the engine. The sudden quiet was more jarring than the noise. Stepping out, I inhaled. The air was a cloying mix of damp earth and something else. Something faintly metallic like old blood. It clung to the back of my throat. The owner, a gaunt man with eyes that seemed too large for his face, emerged from the shadows of the office. He didn't speak, just gestured with a bony finger toward a small, detached cabin at the far end of the lot. His movement was jerky, unnatural. I nodded, my throat tight, and retrieved my duffel bag from the passenger seat. The weight felt insignificant compared to the unease settling in my chest. The cabin was even worse than the main building. A single bulb illuminated a sparse room, a lumpy bed, a scarred wooden dresser, a sink stained with what I hoped was rust. The floorboards groaned under my weight, each step a complaint. I dropped my bag, the thud echoing in the small space. I needed to get to the manor. The motel was just a waypoint, a necessary evil. I just wanted to be there, to finally see the place that was now mine. The drive to the manor was shorter, but the road narrowed, becoming a rutted track swallowed by overgrown woods. Branches scraped against the car's windows, a persistent scratching sound that set my teeth on edge. Then through a parting in the trees it appeared. It was less a house and more a scar on the landscape. A single, skeletal chimney clawed at the bruised twilight sky. It wasn't just an absence of sound. It was a presence of stillness, a watchful quiet that prickled the hairs on my arms. I parked the car, the tires crunching on a gravel path choked with weeds. The front door, a heavy slab of weathered oak, stood ajar. I pushed it open, the hinges screaming a long, drawn-out wail that died in the cavernous interior. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the gloom. The smell of decay was potent here, a thick, musty perfume of forgotten things and slow rot. I ran a hand along the stone wall. It was rough, uneven, and surprisingly damp. A shiver traced its way down my spine. My footsteps echoed unnervingly. I moved deeper into the house, my eyes scanning the gloom. The silence was broken only by the occasional creak of the house settling, or the faint, skittering sound from within the walls that I tried to ignore. I found the library first. Bookshelves lined every wall, stretching to the ceiling, crammed with ancient tomes bound in leather that cracked and peeled at my touch. The air in here was thick with the scent of old paper and something else. A faint, acrid odor like dried ink or perhaps something more organic. As I opened it, a cloud of dust billowed out, making me cough. The pages were brittle, filled with a cramped, spidery script I barely recognized. Further exploration led me to a dining room. A long, heavy table dominated the space, draped in a tattered, moth-eaten cloth. The chairs were arranged as if awaiting guests who had long since departed. On the table, however, were the remnants of something else. Not plates, but shallow, obsidian bowls. And in the center of the table, a single, intricately carved wooden effigy, its features distorted into a silent scream. I moved toward the back of the house, drawn by a faint, rhythmic dripping sound. It led me to a large, sparsely furnished room. In the center of the room, a shallow basin was carved directly into the stone. The sound was maddeningly steady, a metronome counting down. To what? I leaned closer, the metallic tang in the air suddenly overwhelming. It was the smell of iron, fresh iron. I backed away from the basin, my breath catching in my throat. The room felt heavy, charged with an unseen energy. A sense of profound wrongness permeated the air, a static charge that made my skin crawl. Why would someone build a room like this? And that dripping? Was it truly just water? 10 hours. My hands, I noticed, were clammy, slick against the steering wheel. The air in the car was stale, thick with the scent of desperation and cheap air freshener. I pulled into the gravel lot, the crunch under my tires a welcome if jarring sound. The motel itself looked like it had lost a fight with gravity and time. Paint peeled like sunburnt skin, revealing patches of gray, weathered wood. A single bulb flickered weakly above the office door, casting a sickly yellow glow. I was indeed the only guest. The parking lot was empty save for my dust-caked sedan. A profound silence pressed in, broken only by the wind whistling through unseen cracks. The owner, a man with eyes like chipped flint and a perpetual grimace, emerged from the shadows of the office. He moved with a strange, jerky gait, like a marionette with tangled strings. His smile, when it came, was a thin, unsettling line that didn't reach his eyes. "Just you, huh?" He rasped, his voice like gravel skittering on pavement. "Just me," I confirmed, my own voice sounding unnervingly loud. "One room, please." He nodded, his gaze lingering on my face a moment too long. His flint eyes seemed to bore into me. "Just don't." He turned and shuffled back into the dim interior of the office, leaving me standing in the deepening twilight. Room 7 was at the far end of the row, a small, musty box that smelled faintly of damp earth and something else. Something metallic. The bed was lumpy, the sheets worn thin. I sat on the edge, the springs groaning in protest. I tried to shake off the feeling of being watched, the owner's words echoing in my mind. "Don't go wandering, not at night." I unpacked my meager belongings, the same few books on local history, my research notes, a change of clothes. The manor. It was always the manor. I'd inherited it from a great-aunt thrice removed, a woman I'd never met. The lawyer had been vague, mentioning only that the estate was complicated. The rumors, though, were what truly snagged my attention. An ancient burial ground. I found a small, tarnished silver locket in my bag. Inside, a faded daguerreotype of a woman with severe eyes and hair pulled back tightly. My great-aunt, perhaps. She looked unhappy, resigned. I traced the cool metal with my finger. Hours later, sleep refused to come. The wind outside had picked up, moaning around the corners of the motel. The owner's warning kept replaying. "Don't go wandering." My gaze fell upon the cheap particle-board dresser. It was old, scratched, and stained. One of the drawers was slightly ajar. Driven by a restless curiosity, I pulled it open. It was empty, save for a thick layer of dust and a loose floorboard. My heart gave a strange lurch. I knelt, my fingers probing the edge of the board. Inside, nestled amongst cobwebs, was a small, leather-bound book. It was old, the leather cracked and brittle. The pages were yellowed, the handwriting cramped and spidery. A journal. I brought it closer to the dim light, my breath catching in my throat. The first entry was dated over a century ago. The author, a man named Elias Thorne, wrote of his arrival at the manor, his initial excitement at uncovering its history. He mentioned recurring dreams, visions of figures cloaked in gray, their faces obscured. Elias wrote of a cycle tied to the land, to the ancient ones buried beneath. He described a ritual, a pact made long ago that required an offering to keep something appeased. He spoke of a growing unease, a sense of being watched, of the manor itself breathing, waiting. My fingers trembled as I turned the brittle pages. Elias's descent into paranoia was palpable. He described a specific date, a turning of the season when the veil thinned, when the hunger of the land grew strongest. He mentioned the manor's previous inhabitants, how they'd all met unfortunate ends, their disappearances often coinciding with this specific time. The last entry was short, scrawled in a shaky hand. "It demands. It always demands. I see it now. The price must be paid. It wants to be fed." The ink trailed off, smudged as if the pen had fallen from his grasp. I closed the journal, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The wind outside howled, a mournful, hungry sound. Elias Thorne. He hadn't just died here, he'd been consumed. Was this what awaited me at the manor? What exactly was this thing Elias had unearthed? And what did it want with me? The loose floorboard gave way with a soft groan, a sound swallowed by the oppressive quiet of the room. My fingers, dusted with the grit of decades, pried it open. Beneath, nestled in the shallow cavity, was not a treasure chest or a hidden diary, but a small, leather-bound book. Its cover was worn smooth, the leather cracked like parched earth. No title, no author. Just the faint, almost imperceptible scent of something ancient, something like dried leaves and forgotten rain. I lifted it, the weight surprising me. It felt substantial, dense with untold stories. My hands, usually steady when handling delicate manuscripts, trembled. I traced the raised grain of the leather, a shiver tracing its way up my spine. This was it. This was the missing piece. I just knew it. The manor held its secrets tight, but this small volume felt like a key. Back in my room at the roadside motel, only guest, owner acting strange, I spread the book open on the cheap Formica tabletop. The pages were brittle, yellowed with age. The ink faded to a sepia tone. The script was spidery, elegant, and utterly unfamiliar. It wasn't Latin or Greek, or any language I recognized from my years of historical study. Yet as I stared at the symbols, a strange familiarity bloomed in my mind like a half-remembered dream. They seemed to hum, to vibrate with a silent energy. I spent hours poring over the text, my brow furrowed in concentration. The roadside motel, only guest, owner acting strange, was a study in faded glory. The neon sign outside buzzed erratically, casting a sickly green glow through the thin curtains. The air in my room was heavy with the smell of stale cigarette smoke and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet. I tried to ignore the owner, a gaunt man with eyes that darted too quickly, but his presence felt like a constant, unnerving hum beneath the surface of the night. He'd brought me a plate of lukewarm food earlier, his grip tight as he gripped the tray, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond my shoulder. The book offered no easy answers. It was a riddle wrapped in an enigma, a cipher waiting to be cracked. But glimpses of meaning began to surface. Images formed in my mind as I traced the characters. A gnarled tree, its branches reaching like skeletal fingers. A circle of stones, their surfaces slick with an unidentifiable sheen. A figure, cloaked and bowed. And then the recurring symbol. A spiral, a dark, inward-turning spiral. A sudden sharp rap on my door jolted me. My head snapped up, my heart leaping into my throat. I hadn't ordered anything. The roadside motel, only guest, owner acting strange, was usually silent at this hour, save for the occasional rumble of a passing truck on the highway. "Who is it?" I called out, my voice tight. Then, a soft scraping sound like fingernails dragging across wood. I froze, my breath catching in my chest. It wasn't the owner. His movements were always clumsy, his presence announced by heavy footsteps. This was different, stealthy, deliberate, another scrape, closer to the bottom of the door this time. I scrambled back from the table, the book falling to the floor with a thud. My eyes darted around the small room, searching for an escape, for a weapon. The flimsy chair, the metal coat hanger, useless. The scraping stopped. A long, agonizing pause stretched into eternity. I strained my ears, listening for any sound, any breath. Nothing. The only noise was the frantic thumping of my own pulse against my ribs. So faint I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. It seemed to slither from beneath the door, a dry, rustling sound, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. "Found. You." The words were not spoken, not exactly. My hands clenched into fists, my grip tight. It spread slowly, deliberately across the worn linoleum floor. It wasn't water. It smelled faintly of damp earth and something else. Something metallic. My breath hitched. My body felt heavy, rooted to the spot. I wanted to scream, to run, but my limbs refused to obey. The droplet pulsed as if with a slow, deliberate heartbeat, and then another joined it. The symbols in the book flashed behind my eyes, the inward-turning spiral. It was not just a symbol. It was a direction, a destination, and I was being led. The puddle began to move, not flowing, but creeping. Inch by agonizing inch, it advanced towards my feet. The metallic scent intensified, cloying and sickening. My vision narrowed, the edges of the room blurring. Was this the entity from the manor, finally reaching out? Or was this just the roadside motel, only guest, owner acting strange, playing a twisted game? The silence in the motel room was a thick, suffocating blanket. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a slick, glistening sheen on the cracked asphalt of the parking lot. The only light came from the flickering neon sign of the roadside motel, only guest, owner acting strange, its red glow bleeding through the grimy window pane and casting long, distorted shadows across the threadbare carpet. I hadn't slept. Not really. The old estate, my supposed inheritance, felt more like a tomb than a home. The air inside had been heavy, pregnant with a scent I couldn't quite place. Damp earth. Yes, but something else, something metallic and acrid like old blood and forgotten fear. And then the words, or the feeling of words. The bargain is etched. The debt remains. My fingers traced the worn leather of the journal I'd salvaged from the Manor's study. Its pages were brittle, filled with a cramped, spidery script that spoke of ancient pacts and appeasement. I ran a hand through my already disheveled hair. The owner of this roadside motel, only guest, owner acting strange, had been odd. He'd eyed me with a peculiar intensity when I'd checked in, his smile not quite reaching his eyes, a stillness about him that felt wrong. The journal detailed a ritual, not a plea for help but a payment, a cyclical tribute. The dates mentioned were vague, tied to celestial alignments and the turning of seasons, but the intent was terrifyingly clear. The entity demanded a life, a vibrant spark to sustain itself, and it seemed to be preparing for its next collection. It was a primal alarm, a warning that the cycle was nearing completion and I was standing at the precipice. I flipped through the journal, my heart racing a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The ink was faded in places, the paper stained. One passage, heavily underlined, caught my eye. The offering must be willing, yet its will is not its own. It must be drawn, ensnared by the ancient call. The land itself will sing its doom. Willing? How could an offering be willing if it was ensnared? It was a contradiction, a twisted logic that spoke of a power beyond my comprehension. I remembered the unnerving stillness of the manor, the way the very air seemed to press in on me, the faint, almost imperceptible hum that vibrated through the floorboards. It wasn't just an old house. It was a cage, a lure. My focus sharpened, a desperate clarity cutting through the fog of fear. I needed to understand the nature of this entity. Was it a spirit, a force? The journal offered fragmented clues, allusions to earth spirits, to ancient gods of hunger and sacrifice. It spoke of a pact made by my ancestors, a desperate bargain struck in a time of great need, a promise of protection in exchange for this. A sudden scrape from the hallway outside my door made me jump. My breath hitched. I froze, straining my ears. Just the hum of the ancient, flickering neon sign. My eyes darted to the door, to the thin gap beneath it. The journal mentioned a way to break the cycle, a counter-ritual, but the details were maddeningly incomplete. It spoke of a severing, of unraveling the threads of the pact. But what did that entail? What price would such an act demand? The entity was clearly aware of my presence, of my prying. It was actively hindering me, sowing doubt, amplifying my fear. I reread the passage about the willing offering. The land itself will sing its doom. The manor, the land it sat upon, that was the key. The entity wasn't just in the manor, it was the manor, or at least inextricably bound to it. My gaze fell upon a faded sketch in the journal, a crude depiction of a labyrinth. Beneath it, scrawled in a shaky hand, were the words, "The path to understanding is the path to escape, but the maw guards its secrets well." Escape. I needed more than just knowledge. I needed a weapon, a shield. But what could possibly stand against a hunger as old as the earth itself? Was the owner of this roadside motel, only guest, owner acting strange more than he seemed. The air in the roadside motel, only guest, owner acting strange room was thick with the smell of stale cigarette smoke and something else, something metallic and damp. I'd been here for 2 days, the peeling wallpaper a canvas for the shadows that danced in the corners of my vision. The owner, a man whose eyes seemed too large for his gaunt face, shuffled around the breakfast counter each morning, his movements jerky like a marionette with tangled strings. He never spoke, only offered a thin, unnerving smile that didn't reach his eyes. I was the only guest, the only soul it felt like for miles. I traced the carvings on the wooden box, the same sigils that had appeared in the manor's hidden chamber. They pulsed with a faint, internal light when I touched them, a warmth that seeped into my fingertips then up my arm. It was a language I knew it, a forgotten dialect of dread. The date loomed, tomorrow, the night of the harvest moon. The entity wanted its due. My gaze fell upon the tattered journal, its pages brittle with age. The final entry, scrawled in a hand that trembled with a desperate urgency, spoke of a loophole, not an escape but a redirection, a sacrifice not of blood but of connection. But the hunger of the entity was palpable, a gnawing emptiness that echoed in my own gut. It craved life, a spark to consume. I needed to return. The motel, this sterile, temporary cage, offered no sanctuary. The entity was tied to the land, yes, but its influence, I now understood, was a creeping vine. It had already begun to coil around my thoughts, my dreams. The metallic tang in the air grew stronger. I realized it was the faint scent of rust, of old iron. The bedsheets beneath my hand felt rough, almost like burlap. I sat up, my breath catching in my throat. A faint scratching sound emanated from the thin wall separating my room from the next. Scritch. Pause. It wasn't the settling of an old building. It was deliberate. I gripped the edge of the nightstand, my grip tight. The sigils on the box seemed to glow brighter now, a low hum vibrating through the wood. The journal spoke of a transference, a binding. If the entity craved a life force, perhaps it could be appeased in a way that didn't involve me. But the cost. The journal was maddeningly vague on the true cost. A severance of the deepest tie, it read. What tie? My connection to my own life, to my memories. The scratching stopped. A heavy silence descended, broken only by the frantic thumping in my own ears. I could feel the shift, the subtle change in the atmosphere. It was here. Not in the room, not yet, but its attention was focused. I stood, my legs feeling like lead. The box felt heavy in my hands. I had to go back. The manor was the locus, the source, and the ritual demanded its due on the night of the harvest moon. No, not tomorrow, tonight. The moon was already a sliver of bone in the bruised twilight sky. The owner stood by the door of the motel, his silhouette stark against the fading light. He held a shovel, its metal head glinting dully. His unnerving smile was wider now, a rictus of anticipation. He made no move towards me, simply stood, a silent guardian of the threshold. Was he part of it? A willing participant, or merely a pawn trapped in the same web as me? My heart hammered against my ribs. I could feel the prickle of sweat on my brow. The box in my hands felt warm, almost alive. The journal's words echoed in my mind. The severance is the key. Not to escape, but to redirect. Redirect what? The hunger, the entity itself. I looked at the shovel. I looked at the owner's unblinking stare. The scratching had begun again, this time from beneath the floorboards. A soft, insistent scraping, as if something were trying to claw its way up. The choice was stark. Walk back into the manor, armed with this fragmented knowledge in the sigil box, and confront the entity, hoping to find a way to sever its claim, or what? Stay here, a cornered rat, and wait for it to break through the walls. The journal had offered a path, a dangerous one that promised not freedom but a different kind of burden. A sacrifice, yes, but perhaps not my own. But what if the loophole required something more, something I wasn't prepared to give? What if the deepest tie was more profound than I could comprehend, a link to my very soul? The metallic scent was overpowering now, a coppery tide washing over me. The floorboards creaked. The owner remained motionless. The moon, a pale eye, watched from above. What was the true nature of the sacrifice it demanded, and could I bear to pay the price? The owner, a man whose eyes never quite met mine, kept leaving these small, crudely carved wooden figures on my bedside table. They were always different, twisted shapes that made my skin crawl, but tonight there was a new one. It was smooth, unnervingly so, like polished bone, and it felt warm in my palm, radiating a faint vibration. My hands trembled as I traced its contours. The metallic tang in the air seemed to intensify, no longer just a smell but a taste on my tongue, coppery and foul. The low hum I'd heard for days, a sound I'd dismissed as the ancient plumbing of this forgotten place, was now a palpable thrumming beneath the floorboards, a resonance that vibrated up my legs and into my teeth. It felt like the earth itself was breathing, a slow, ragged inhale and exhale. The proprietor had been more unsettling than usual. He'd lingered at my door this morning, his gaunt face a mask of strained politeness. His fingers, long and skeletal, had tapped a nervous rhythm on the warped wood. "Sleep well, sir," he'd rasped, his voice like dry leaves skittering across concrete. I'd mumbled a non-committal reply, my gaze fixed on the greasy smudge he'd left on the doorframe. He'd smelled of something ancient, like damp earth and forgotten things. Now the silence of the motel was a suffocating blanket. The usual distant rumble of traffic on the highway, a constant, dull roar that had been my only companion, was absent. The world outside had gone quiet, too quiet. I pushed myself off the lumpy mattress, the springs groaning a protest. The wooden figure pulsed in my hand. It was shaped like a knotted root, but with a single, bulbous knot at its center that seemed to swell and recede with each beat of the unseen pulse. I walked to the window, the floorboards creaking under my weight. The night outside was ink black, devoid of stars. No moon. I blinked, rubbing my eyes, but they remained like phantoms caught in the periphery. They was I seeing things, but the thrumming beneath my feet was real. It was growing, the vibrations sharper now, like a trapped insect buzzing against glass. It had merely shifted. I remembered the symbols etched into the stone in the manor's forgotten cellar. The guttural chants I'd deciphered from the brittle pages of the old journal. The desperate plea of the entity, not for blood, but for balance, for a connection. I had offered it something, hadn't I? A promise, a conduit. The wooden figure in my hand suddenly grew intensely hot, forcing me to drop it. It rolled, coming to rest near the door. As it settled, the thrumming beneath the floor reached a crescendo, a deafening roar that seemed to originate from within my own skull. The walls of the room seemed to bulge inward, the peeling wallpaper rippling like water. Then, as abruptly as it began, the noise ceased. The vibration stopped. I stood frozen, my breath catching in my throat. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. The metallic taste in the air was overwhelming. I forced myself to look at the wooden figure. It was no longer smooth. The surface was now rough, pitted, as if something had gnawed at it. It looked like a miniature, perfectly formed wound. A low, scraping sound came from beyond my door. Not the shuffle of the proprietor's worn slippers, but something slower, more deliberate. A drag, a pull. My eyes darted to the door, then to the window. I hadn't banished it. I hadn't appeased it. I had merely redirected it. The ritual wasn't about sacrifice in the way I'd understood. It was about transference. And the figure, the conduit, had been sent to me. What had it taken from me? What had it left in its place? The wound on the wooden figure mirrored a growing emptiness in my own chest. The metallic taste intensified. It was the taste of my own blood. The scraping at the door grew louder, closer. I could hear a faint, wet clicking now, like insect mandibles. The proprietor's strange carvings, the warped wood, the metallic scent, it was all connected. The man wasn't just an owner. He was a keeper, and I had disturbed the balance. What was waiting for me outside that door? The key scraped against the lock, a grating sound that echoed in the cavernous silence of the roadside motel, only guest, owner acting strange room. It felt heavier than it should, this tarnished brass thing, a weight in my palm that seemed to pull me down. 2 days. 2 days I'd been holed up here, the peeling wallpaper a sickly yellow, the shadows in the corners of my vision a constant, shifting presence. The owner, a man with eyes like chips of flint and a smile that never quite reached them, brought me lukewarm coffee each morning. He never spoke, just left the chipped mug by the door, his footsteps fading too quickly down the linoleum-covered hall. Outside, the wind howled, a mournful sound that seeped through the thin walls. It carried the scent of pine and damp earth, the same scent that clung to my clothes, to my skin, a constant reminder of Blackwood Manor. I'd thought I'd escaped. I'd thought the frantic drive, the miles of desolate highway had put enough distance between me and that place. But the manor wasn't a place I left. It was a place that followed I. My fingers trembled as I pushed the door open. The room was exactly as I'd left it. The unmade bed, the crumpled sheets a testament to my restless sleep, the faint, metallic tang in the air. It was the smell of old blood, I'd realized eventually, a smell that no amount of cheap motel air freshener could ever scrub away. I sank onto the edge of the mattress, the springs groaning in protest. My reflection in the cracked mirror above the dresser was a stranger's, gaunt with eyes that held a hunted look, a perpetual flicker of fear that I couldn't seem to extinguish. I reached into my worn leather satchel, my fingers brushing against the cool, smooth surface of the obsidian shard. It was all I had left of Blackwood Manor, a piece of the altar, a fragment of the thing that had nearly consumed me. It pulsed with a faint internal heat, a silent thrum against my skin. I'd kept it, of course. A foolish, dangerous impulse, but I couldn't bring myself to discard it. It was proof that it was real, proof that I had survived. The old text spoke of cyclical hunger, of entities bound to the earth demanding their due. I dismissed it as metaphor, as primitive attempts to explain natural phenomena. Now I understood. The land remembered, and it never forgot its debts. I traced the jagged edge of the shard, the ritual. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the window pane sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. My senses were heightened, too sharp, attuned to a danger that no longer existed, or perhaps a danger that had simply changed its form. I stood and walked to the window, pulling back the thin, grimy curtain. The parking lot was empty, save for a rusted pickup truck and my own car, a silent sentinel under the bruised twilight sky. The owner's car, a nondescript sedan, was nowhere to be seen. He'd been watching me, I knew. His flinty eyes had followed my every move. He was part of it, wasn't he? A guardian, a silent observer of the manor's ceaseless cycle. A sudden gust of wind rattled the window, a sound like skeletal fingers scratching at the glass. I flinched, my breath catching in my throat. My hand instinctively went to my satchel, my fingers finding the obsidian shard. It felt warmer now, almost hot. A low hum seemed to emanate from it, a vibration that resonated deep within my bones. The history books lay scattered on the small, scarred table, open to pages filled with arcane symbols and faded ink. I'd brought them with me, a desperate attempt to find answers, to understand the forces I'd encountered. But the words blurred, the symbols seemed to writhe, mocking my efforts. Knowledge was a fragile shield against such ancient hunger. I closed my eyes, trying to recall the feeling of the manor's presence, the suffocating weight of its intent. It wasn't just a building. It was a living, breathing entity, its roots sunk deep into the soil, its hunger a constant, gnawing emptiness. And I had touched it. I had become entangled in its ancient dance. A car door slammed somewhere outside, a sharp, abrupt sound that made me jump. I peered through the gap in the curtain. No one, just the wind whipping dead leaves across the asphalt, yet the feeling persisted. The prickling sensation on the back of my neck, the unnerving certainty that I was not alone. I picked up a thick tome, its pages brittle with age. A passage caught my eye, a hastily scrawled annotation in the margin. The land demands its due. It remembers the blood. It will always thirst. I ran my thumb over the ink, the words seeming to pulse with a malevolent life of their own. The metallic smell in the room seemed to intensify, thick and cloying. I took a deep, shaky breath, trying to push back the rising tide of panic. I was safe here in this anonymous room miles from Blackwood Manor. Yet the manor was within me now. But I knew better. It was a lure, a trap. The wind howled again, a long, drawn-out moan. There was the sound of the wind or something else. I strained my ears, my body rigid. I turned away from the window, my gaze falling on the door. The owner, he would be back. He always came back, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew I was still here. He knew I was still listening. The road ahead stretched out, uncertain and fraught with unseen dangers. Blackwood Manor had left its mark. Had I truly escaped, or had I merely become a vessel, waiting for the next demand?